I come from a family of a lot of leaders and political influence. My grandma was the first female tribal president of the Oglala Lakota Sioux. And she, over in Pine Ridge, she beat Russell Means to do so. And she has a very powerful story on her own. She ended up getting impeached in 2008 for standing up against Kristi Noem, the governor, when she restricted abortion across the state of South Dakota, one of the first really restrictive abortion bans in the country. And my grandma was like, my land is sovereign. I'm going to build a Planned Parenthood on my reservation that's going to be open to all women in South Dakota. And that was very controversial and a very big issue, and the tribal government ended up impeaching her, and she ran for re-election to retain the seat or earn the seat back, and lost by less than a couple votes. There's a whole movie about it. It's called Young Lakota, and it kind of covers her story. But that was I think growing up with that influence has always made me very aware of politics and the political scene. I've always been very aware of kind of my identity and my being Indigenous identity being a political identity, but always feeling closely connected to my culture. I think an urban Indigenous experience is often very different than those on tribal governments and tribal reservations. And we have a rising urban Native population in this country. I think 60% of Indigenous people are now living in urban areas. And so, that has really like shaped my identity, and being in Bozeman and just growing up low income in Bozeman too, from a family that relied on subsidized housing, on SNAPs, on the food bank. It wasn't until, my senior year in high school when I was in the legislature and seeing that policy really can mean life and death and have an impact on people's lives, and just one bill being passed could impact someone's future. And so to me, that's when I really saw the seriousness and also the possibility, like wanting to learn more and wanting to know more about my culture and who I am and my identity. And I think a lot of that stems from feeling like an outsider in Bozeman and in Bozeman public schools, often being the only person of color, Indigenous person in the room. And I like growing up and having Indian education for all means a lot of people were curious about, this is your culture, this is your identity, what do you know? When in reality I was learning with just the same pace with kids. Folks have been so supportive and so helpful, specifically Benjamin, the executive director of the tenant union, and Anne Michelle. They have been, I think they've seen a lot in me before I could even see it in myself. I got involved in the tenant union in 2020 during the uprisings of George Floyd. I felt really, at the time, I was feeling really just like, our political electoral systems were not working rightfully, and we're not working in a way that was really reaching people and really connecting with people in a deeper way. It felt like we were just election cycle to election cycle. And during those uprisings, I saw my community come out in a way that I had never seen before. I think at the time it was the largest Bozeman protest prior to these most recent ones. I think there was like 6,000 or 7,000 people that came out at that time in 2020, and just seeing the streets down all of Main Street Bozeman covered in social justice, racial justice, was so powerful, and was something that I think, a town that is so predominantly white standing up and being like, no, this isn't okay, and also isn't okay in our own communities, was something that was really energizing and hopeful to me. I ended up being like, I have some electoral experience working on Kamala's campaign, like, let me see how I can help. And that was the most energizing campaign I'd ever worked on, just refreshing we were all people who had been directly impacted in some way by what was going on, of high rents, just high cost of living, of seeing this town change in a way that was not recognizable to the most of us. And what could we do? And so we had about, I think, 20-member team. We'd meet weeklies on Tuesdays and try and figure out how we're running Joey for office. And we were just throwing things at the wall, hoping they'd stick. And it was yeah, I remember we ended up losing that campaign pretty poorly. And at that moment, I remember feeling like this is not the end. This is, none of these people are going anywhere. And I think that was what was the most exciting thing about it. I'd worked on campaigns, and often election night is like the last time we see each other. But looking around, I was like, none of these people are going anywhere. And so that's when we decided we need to strategize and figure out what are people of Bozeman really needing and what can we do to meet that. And so we knocked doors and asked people, just a bunch of random doors out in Southside Bozeman, all the way down to Main Street and low income housing like House of Bar, and just asking folks, what do you need? The question we asked was, if you were mayor, what are 3 things you would change about Bozeman tomorrow? Hoping to get more of that idea of like, what are you struggling with, but also what do you see your community struggling with, and what would you hope to address? And that's when over and over and over again the answer was housing. Was, I may not be struggling with housing inaffordability, but I see my community struggling and seeing how they can't afford, they're being priced out, my employees are being priced out, I'm being priced out from property taxes, from rent, X, Y, and Z. So we really saw an opportunity of someone needs to address housing, and also that feels totally correct to what we're feeling too. And so we ended up, having a 6-month-long research process where we met just knocking doors. We talked with experts in the community who have been working on housing for years, folks at HRDC, One Valley, all the way to like former mayors like Steve Kirchhoff, and former elected officials, teachers, professors, anyone who was willing to talk to, we were going to talk to them. And so we ended up having a few campaign ideas of what we wanted to do, but over that 6-month process narrowed it down to the Airbnb campaign. That's when we went on to fight for that first campaign, launched the tenant union, and we've just been on fire ever since.